for aggravated homosexuality. President Yoweri Museveni signed the bill into law in May last year. The law is supported by many in the East African country, but widely condemned by rights activists and others abroad. Activists had contested the law in court, but the judges declined to overturn it in their ruling, saying it was legally passed by Parliament and thus does not violate the Constitution. We decline to nullify the Anti-Homosexuality Act 2023 in its entirety, neither would we grant a permanent injunction against enforcement. Deputy Chief Justice Richard Butera said the court, however, ruled that members of the gay community should not be discriminated against when seeking medication. They should be medically and culturally accepted, Butera said. The petitioners, led by lawyer Nicholas Opio, had given 14 grounds for its dismissal. One of the petitioners, Andrew Mwenda, said they would appeal to the Supreme Court. What we have witnessed in court is what I would call a temporary reversal in an overall strategic battle or a strategic war against a cultural bigotry and prejudice. So we are going to appeal to the Supreme Court, not for the striking down the different components of this law, but for overturning this law into its entirety, he said. The law defines aggravated homosexuality as cases of homosexual relations involving a minor and other categories of vulnerable people, or when the perpetrator is infected with HIV. A suspect convicted of attempted aggravated homosexuality can be imprisoned for up to 14 years, and the offences of attempted homosexuality is punishable by up to 10 years. Homosexuality was already illegal in Uganda under a colonial-era law criminalizing sexual activity against the order of nature. The punishment for that offense is life imprisonment. The United Nations expressed deep concern when the new law was passed, with the UN Human Rights Office calling it a recipe for systematic violations of the rights of LGBTQ+ people and others. U.S. President Joe Biden called the law a tragic violation of universal human rights, one that is not worthy of the Ugandan people and one that jeopardizes the prospects of critical economic growth for the entire country. The World Bank halted new loans to Uganda, saying additional measures were necessary to ensure projects align with the bank's environmental and social standards. Homosexuality is criminalized in more than 30 of Africa's 54 countries. Some Africans see it as a behavior imported from abroad and not a sexual orientation. South Sudan's President Salva Kiir on Wednesday warned lawmakers not to cling to power just weeks after his former rival turned deputy proposed a postponement of elections expected to be held in December. Kiir said an extension of the period of transition to elections would deny citizens an opportunity to choose their leaders and urged Parliament to pass the necessary laws to pave the way for the elections. The president was addressing lawmakers as Parliament returned from recess Wednesday. South Sudan was supposed to hold elections before February 2023, but that timetable was pushed back last August to December 2024. Parliament Speaker Jemanunu Kumba said lawmakers would redouble their efforts to ensure that all the prerequisites for elections are met. Vice President Riek Machar, whose forces fought in a 5-year civil war that ended in a 2018 peace deal, suggested last month an extension of the transitional government's term to allow for adequate preparation for the elections. The landlocked country is facing an economic crisis due to a decline in oil exports after war-torn Sudan last month declared force majeure on oil shipments passing through the country. The fighting in Sudan has affected shipments destined for a terminal near Port Sudan along the Red Sea coast. Civil servants and security forces in South Sudan have not been paid for the last 6 months due to the economic crisis. South Sudan is working to put in place a permanent constitution, an electoral commission, and a unified police force made up of a pro-government and rebel factions that would provide security to the troubled nation. Communal violence has continued in parts of South Sudan. The United Nations, while extending a peacekeeping mission in the country, has demanded an end to the violence and pushed for swift progress by the government to ensure that delayed elections are held peacefully and freely in December. Zimbabwe declared a state of disaster Wednesday over a devastating drought that is sweeping across much of southern Africa, with the country's president saying it needs $2 billion for humanitarian assistance. The declaration was widely expected following similar actions by neighboring Zambia and Malawi, where drought linked to the El Nino weather phenomenon has scorched crops, leaving millions of people in need of food assistance. Due to the El Nino-induced drought, more than 80% of our calculation from January to March. The first few months of the year are traditionally known as the lean period, when households run short as they wait for the new harvest. However, there is little hope for replenishing food stores this year, and Mnangagwa said that even more people than previously forecast will likely need food aid. More than 60% of Zimbabwe's 15 million people live in rural areas, growing the food they eat and sometimes small surpluses that can be sold to cover expenses, such as school fees. With relatively little participation in the cash economy, many of those won't be able to buy food even when it is available in the markets. The 8-year-old lone survivor of a bus crash that killed at least 45 people in South Africa before Easter weekend will be discharged from the hospital on Wednesday, health officials said. Atlang Siako is expected to travel to her home in neighboring Botswana from where the bus was traveling last Thursday on its way to an annual Easter pilgrimage that attracts hundreds of thousands of followers of the Zion Christian Church. The bus carried off a bridge near Mokopane village in the northern province of Limpopo, fell more than 150 feet and caught fire as it hit the rocks below, killing the driver and all passengers except Siako. Health officials are still working to identify the burnt remains of those who died in the accident. At least 8 bodies have been identified, officials said, as they continue to perform tests to identify the others. Limpopo Provincial Health Minister Fofi Ramatuba told reporters on Wednesday that doctors were happy with Siako's condition and that she could return home to Botswana. "We want her to heal completely, but she is fine. She is still in a lot of pain, but we are satisfied with her condition," she said. Ramathuba confirmed that at least 35 bodies had been retrieved from the scene, and officials were trying to identify them so they could be repatriated to Botswana. The government of Botswana has announced it will hold national memorial services around the country for the victims. World Central Kitchen is calling for an independent investigation into the Israeli strikes that killed 7 of its aid workers in Gaza. In a statement issued Thursday, the international food charity says it has asked Australia, Canada, Poland, the United States, and the United Kingdom, whose citizens were killed, to join them in demanding an independent third-party investigation into these attacks. "We ask the Israeli government to immediately preserve all documents, communication, video, and/or audio recordings, and any other materials potentially relevant to the April 1st strikes," the statement said. Israel says it carried out the strikes by mistake and that it has launched its own investigation into the attack. The military carried out multiple strikes on a convoy of 3 cars, at least one of which was clearly marked with the charity's logo. World Central Kitchen says it coordinated the team's movement with the army, which was aware of their itinerary, route, and humanitarian mission. The workers were delivering aid that had arrived by sea in a recently opened maritime corridor aimed at getting food to hundreds of thousands of starving Palestinians in northern Gaza, which has been largely isolated by Israeli forces for months. The attack interrupted those efforts as World Central Kitchen and other charities suspended operations over the deteriorating security situation. The ships returned to Cyprus with an estimated 240 tons of undelivered humanitarian aid. The United Nations Children's Agency says 1/3 of the children under age 2 in northern Gaza were suffering from acute malnutrition in March. Adding that the figure has more than doubled in the last 2 months, UNICEF Deputy Executive Director Ted Chaiban told the UN Security Council on Wednesday that dozens of children in the northern Gaza Strip have reportedly died from malnutrition and dehydration in recent weeks, and half the population is facing catastrophic food insecurity. Chaiban said he saw a staggering decline in the conditions of children during his second visit to Gaza in January. He pointed to widespread destruction of infrastructure, a quasi-blockade on the north, repeated denials or delays in getting Israeli approval for humanitarian convoys, and fuel shortages and electricity and telecommunications blackouts, which have been devastating for children. Virginia Gamba, the UN Special Envoy for Children in Conflict, told the Council that the latest UN report issued last year verified 3,941 cases where youngsters were prevented from getting food and other assistance. The highest figures, she said, were in Gaza and the West Bank, Yemen, Afghanistan and Mali. Gamba said data gathered for the next report in June shows we are on target to witness a shocking increase of the incident of the denial of humanitarian access globally. In addition to the Palestinian territories, she pointed to Haiti, where there are high levels of arbitrary impediments and or outright denial of humanitarian access to children. U.S. Ambassador Linda Thomas-Greenfield, doctors in Gaza have reported being horrified at treating children suffering from war wounds and watching children die from acute malnutrition. She said that humanitarian assistance is desperately needed now, and it must be facilitated to mitigate the impact of an impending famine. Thomas Greenfield said that food and other aid is also urgently needed for children in Congo, Afghanistan, Sudan, and Africa's Sahel region, and Rohingya Muslim youngsters in Myanmar. A fire in a tailoring shop on Wednesday killed 7 people, including 2 children, in the Indian city of Aurangabad, police said. The blaze created panic in parts of the businesses district in the city of Maharashtra state. Authorities suspect that the death occurred due to smoke inhalation, the press cited city police chief Manoj Lohia as saying. Authorities were investigating the cause of the fire in the city, nearly 340 kilometers northeast of Mumbai, India's financial and entertainment capital. Fires are common in India, where builders and residents often flout building laws and safety codes. In 2019, a fire caused by an electrical short circuit engulfed a building in the Indian capital and killed 43 people. In 2022, a fire in a 4-story commercial building in New Delhi killed at least 27. Rescuers searched Thursday for dozens of people still out of contact a day after Taiwan's strongest earthquake in a quarter-century damaged buildings caused multiple rock slides and killed 9 people. In the eastern coastal city of Hualien, near the epicenter, workers used an excavator to stabilize the base of the damaged Uranus building with construction materials, as some officers took samples of its exterior and chicken browsed amid potted plants on its slanted roof. Mayor Su Shenwei previously said 48 residential buildings had been damaged, some of which were tilting at precarious angles with their ground floors crushed. Some Hualien residents were still staying in tents, but much of the island's day-to-day life was returning to normal. Some local rail service to Hualien resumed, and Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Co. restarted most operations, the press reported. Henry Sustrisno, a 30-year-old professor at Hualien Donghua University, spent Wednesday night in a tent with his wife and baby, fearing aftershocks. We ran out of the apartment and waited for 45 hours before we went up again to grab some important stuff, such as our wallet, and then we are staying here ever since to assess the situation, he said. Others also said they didn't dare to go home because the walls of their apartments were cracked and they lived on higher floors. Taiwanese Premier Chen Chien-jen visited some earthquake evacuees in the morning at a temporary shelter. Panicked passengers jumped into the sea to escape a raging ferry fire in the Gulf of Thailand early Thursday. People on board were safe. The overnight ferry from Surat Thani province was about to arrive at Koh Tao, a popular tourist destination off the Thai coast, when one of the passengers suddenly heard a crackling sound and smelled smoke. Maitri Pramjampa said he saw billowing smoke and fire less than 5 minutes later, and that was when people started shouting and rang the alarm. "We could bear time," he told press. "It was chaotic. People were weeping. I also teared up. Of the 108 people on the ferry, 97 were passengers," Surat Thani officials said on Facebook. The province's public relations department posted that everyone was rescued with no casualties. Videos showed people hurrying out of the ferry's cabin while putting on life vests as thick black smoke swept across the ferry. It was later engulfed in fire. Maitri, a Surat Thani resident who often travels to Koh Tao for work, said several boats came to their rescue around 20 minutes after they called for help, but the boats could not get close to the ferry out of fear of explosions. He said people had to jump into the sea to be rescued. Videos show the ferry was also carrying several vehicles. Everyone had to help themselves, he said. Officials said the fire was since brought under control. It began in the engine, but the cause is still being investigated. The ferry did not sink. The ferry from Surat Thani to Koh Tao carries both commuters and tourists. Koh Tao is about 100 kilometers from the coast. You are watching the international news on Atlantic Television Network. We will be back after this break.
From the line across the ocean to the land beyond the mountains, through the Sahara, we bring on-spot news, live analysis, expert discussions on trending stories in politics, business, socio-economy, sports, and documentaries. So catch all the updates on the happenings around the globe. Stay focused on the fact today, only on ATN. From the line across the ocean to the land beyond the mountains, through the Sahara, we bring on-spot news, live analysis, expert discussions on trending stories in politics, business, socio-economy, sports, and documentaries. So catch all the updates on the happenings around the globe. Stay focused on the fact today, only on ATN.
This is the international news on Atlantic Television Network. Now the rest of our stories. Turkey's highest electoral authority on Wednesday restored the right of newly elected mayor from a pro-Kurdish party to hold office, overturning an earlier decision by a lower body that had sparked widespread protest and the reversal was another boost for Turkey's opposition following Sunday's local election, which dealt a blow to President Recep Tayyip Erdogan and his Islamic-oriented Justice and Development Party, after their wins last year in the presidential and parliamentary elections. The main opposition party retained its hold of Istanbul and the capital of Ankara and made while a pro-Kurdish party won several municipalities in Turkey's mainly Kurdish regions. Our election authority revoked the mandate of Abdullah Zayden, a politician from the pro-Kurdish Equality and Democracy Party, or DEM, who had won the race for mayor in the eastern city of Van, and replaced him by his runner-up, a candidate from Erdogan's ruling party. The authorities cited a last-minute court decision that ruled that Zayden, who spent time in prison, was not qualified to run for office. Zayden had won 55% of the votes in Sunday's balloting, while Abdullahat Avas of Erdogan's AKP garnered 27%. That decision triggered protests in Van and other cities. The police used water cannons and tear gas to disperse demonstrators and made several arrests. In Istanbul, police also broke up a demonstration by a dozen of lawyers who marched to a courthouse to denounce the decision. The High Electoral Board Wednesday considered an appeal by DEM and ruled to reinstate Zayden. The state-run Anadolu agency reported the decision was taken by a majority of the board's members, the agency said. Over the past years, Erdogan's government pro-Kurdish mayors from office for alleged links to Kurdish militants and replaced them with state-appointed trustees. A fire that spread through an Istanbul nightclub during renovations, killing 29 people, was likely caused by welding sparks igniting combustible material, a newspaper reported Wednesday, citing fire department officials. The fire engulfed the popular Masquerade nightclub on Tuesday, trapping workers and club employees inside. It left 29 people dead and another person with serious injuries. Authorities have detained 9 people for questioning, including club managers and people in charge of the renovation work. The club, which was closed for renovations during the Holy Month, was located on the ground and basement floors of a 16-story residential building in the Besiktas district on the European side of the city, bisected by the Bosphorus Straits. It had planned to reopen on April 10th. Governor David Gül told reporters that the cause of the fire was under investigation. The government assigned prosecutors and investigators to probe the incident. Press reports said the fire is believed to have been caused by sparks from a welding machine being used to install sound insulation and decoration material. It reportedly set off an explosion, which in turn set another construction material ablaze. The newspaper cited unidentified fire department officials in its report. Officials have not publicly commented on the fire's cause. Correspondent reported that the area where the renovation work was taking place was like a labyrinth, making it difficult for the victims to find their way out. The victims included Gökhan Tevlek, a club DJ, Atanur Aladag, who was a cook, and Akin and Yilmaz Kiri, a father and son team of welders, according to Turkish media reports. Video from the scene showed flames billowing from the side of the building, firefighters dousing an entrance to the club, and people carrying a victim on a stretcher towards an ambulance. Other first responders have also been victims of the fighting. The World Health Organization said Thursday that ambulance workers and other health transport staff face a higher risk of injury or death. Many emergency teams come under fire either on the way to a call or at their bases, WHO said in a report. This is a horrifying pattern. Dr. Emanuele Bruni, WHO's incident manager in Ukraine, was quoted as saying in the report, "These attacks threaten their safety and further devastate communities that have been living under constant shelling for more than 2 years." Ukrainian soldiers shot down 11 of the 20 drones Russia launched against Ukraine during the night the general staff died. NATO marked on Thursday 75 years of collaboration and North America, with its top diplomats vowing to stay the course in Ukraine as better armed Russian troops assert control on the battlefield. The anniversary comes as the now 32-nation alliance weighs a plan to provide more predictable longer-term military support to Ukraine. Plagued by ammunition shortages, Ukraine this week lowered the military conscription age from 27 to 25 in an effort to replenish its depleted ranks. Ukraine is under heavy 7, Estonian Foreign Minister Markus Stachner told reporters, appealing for more military material for Ukraine like air defense system, drones and artillery shells. We need to give these systems which we are not using to Ukraine to take and protect their people, civil infrastructure and also energy infrastructure, he said, before a ceremony with his counterparts to mark the day NATO's founding treaty was signed, April 4, 1949 in Washington. When NATO leaders meet in Washington from July 9th to 11th, hundreds of staffers fill the vast air terminal-like space at the center of NATO's sprawling Brussels headquarters, while scores of others looked down from glassed walkways and stairways as Belgian and Dutch military bands played the NATO hymn, the original Washington Treaty laid before them. I like the Washington Treaty, not least because it is very short, NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg. Just 14 paragraphs over a few pages, never has a single document with few words meant so much to many people. So much security, so much prosperity, and so much peace. NATO is debating a plan to provide more predictable military support to Ukraine in coming years as better armed Russian troops assert control on the battlefield, the organization's top civil official said Wednesday. We strongly believe that support to Ukraine should be less dependent on short-term voluntary on long-term NATO commitments, NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg said before chairing a meeting of the alliance's foreign ministers in Brussels. Early on Wednesday, Ukraine lowered the military conscription age from 27 to 25 to help replenish its depleted ranks. After more than 2 years of war, a shortage of infantry combined with a severe ammunition shortfall has helped handle. The reason why we do this is the situation on the battlefield. It is serious, Stoltenberg told reporters. We see how Russia is pushing, and we see how they try to win this war by just waiting us out. The plan is to have NATO coordinate the work of the Ukraine Defense Contact Group, a forum of around 50 countries that has regularly gathered during the war to drum up weapons and ammunition for Ukraine rather than the U.S. European Command, U.S. General Christopher Cavoli is NATO's top military commander as well as command, so the person in charge would not change. But Stoltenberg said a former institutional framework is needed as the war drags on and that NATO can provide it. While the move would not see NATO directly providing weapons to Ukraine, as an organization with 32 members that functions by consensus, the Allies only agreed to send non-lethal aid like demining equipment, fuel and medical supplies. New phase in its involvement in the war. Is desperate to do more for Ukraine, particularly while Russia holds a military advantage but its members are not ready to offer the country their ultimate security guarantee membership, nor do they want to be dragged into a wider war with a nuclear-armed military power like Russia. Pope Francis led thousands of people in a moment of silence Wednesday to pray for the aid workers killed by an Israeli strike in Gaza and a young Ukrainian soldier named Alexandre who was killed in appealed anew for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza and the release of hostages taken from Israel on October 7 by Hamas. Praying for the families of the 7 World Central Kitchen workers killed, he called for humanitarian aid to reach Gaza's people and for all efforts to prevent the conflict from spreading. At the end of his general audience, Francis also showed tourists St. Peter's Square the rosary and camouflaged New Testament book that a 23-year-old Ukrainian had with him when he was killed in the eastern city of Avdiivka. They were apparently given to Francis 2 weeks ago by Sina Lucia Caram, an Argentine-born nun living in Spain who has spearheaded multiple humanitarian missions to Ukraine to bring in aid and ferry out wounded soldiers. According to a March 13th Instagram post, Karam said Francis became emotional during a private audience when she presented him with Alexandra's Rosary and New Testament. She said Francis himself had blessed on a previous occasion for Karam to distribute in Ukraine. He urged me to continue. He gave me more rosaries to bring to Ukraine, she wrote at the time. In showing off the items Wednesday, Francis flipped through the pages of Alexandra's underlined New Testament and said the young man still had an entire life ahead of him when he was killed. Of silent prayer, thinking of this kid and so many like him killed in this mad. Francis has previously shown off other relics of the Ukraine war, including a battered Ukrainian flag recovered from Bucha, the site of early Russian atrocities. More than 250 Holocaust survivors have joined an international initiative to share their stories of loss and survival with students around the world during a time of rising anti-Semitism following the October 7 Hamas attack on Israel that triggered the war in the Gaza Strip. The Survivor Speakers Bureau was launched Thursday by the New York Material Claims Against Germany, also referred to as the Claims Conference. A Holocaust Survivor Speakers Bureau of this scale and reach is unprecedented, said Gideon Taylor, the president of the Claims Conference. At a moment of dramatically rising anti-Semitism, this program tells the history and educates for the future. 6 million European Jews and people from the Nazis and their collaborators. The Speakers Bureau with students both virtually and in person. In the United States and Germany, educational institutions can invite survivors to personally speak in classrooms and university lecture halls. Educators in other countries can request video conferences to ensure first-hand testimony is accessible. The Claims Conference hopes to soon add more countries where young people can meet survivors in person. Holocaust education is crucial, especially given the current events, said Holocaust survivor Eva Sepezi, who lives in Germany. My goal in sharing my own story of survival is and has always been to show the human impact not just of the Holocaust, but of all the racist and hateful actions being taken in the world, the 91-year-old survivor of the Auschwitz death camp added. If hearing my testimony helps one person understand the role in the event happening in their community, and they can stand, feel it is worth it for me to go remember and share those terrible stories. Anti-Semitism in Germany, many other European countries, the United States, and elsewhere has been described as reaching levels not seen in many decades. The Claims Conference hopes that first-person accounts of the cruelties endured during the Holocaust will help counter disinformation, denial, and prejudice. A cruise ship reportedly carrying Passengers were struck Wednesday in the Spanish northeastern port of Barcelona due to the visa problems of a group of Bolivian passengers who were due to disembark there, officials said. Authorities say 69 Bolivians are not being allowed to leave the ship because they lack valid documents to enter the European border-free Schengen area. Spanish government officials in the city, Bolivian authorities, and the MSC Cruises company. The ship had sailed from Brazil to cover a route in the Mediterranean Sea. Press said that some 1,500 passengers were meanwhile on board the MSC Harmony, hoping to continue the cruise to Croatia. A statement from the Bolivian Foreign Ministry on Tuesday said the Bolivian embassy in Spain and the country's consulate general in Barcelona are carrying out the pertinent steps to address this case, coordinating with Spanish authorities as well as with the MSC Cruises said in a statement the Bolivians included families and children. It said the passengers appear to have proper documentation upon boarding Brazil. We have been informed by the authorities that the visas are not valid for entry into the Schengen area. As a result, passengers have not been able to disembark in Barcelona, which was their final destination. The company said the ship remained in port. The Schengen area is an ID check-free travel zone comprising 29 European countries, most from the European Union. The U.S. Defense Secretary said that the Israeli strikes that killed 7 aid workers this week reinforced concerns about Israel's plans to expand its ground offensive to the southern Gaza city of Rafah. Lloyd Austin expressed his outrage over the strikes in a phone call with his Israeli counterpart, Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, late Wednesday. According to Austin stressed the need to immediately take concrete steps to protect aid workers and Palestinian civilians in Gaza after with foreign aid groups. He also reiterated U.S. calls for an independent investigation into Monday's deadly strikes. This tragedy reinforced the expressed concerns over a potential Israeli military operation in Rafah, specifically for the need to ensure the evacuation of Palestinian civilians and the flow. Austin said, Israel has said the multiple strikes on the aid workers' convoy was a mistake and that it has launched an independent investigation. The U.S. has provided crucial military aid and diplomatic support for Israel's nearly 6-month offensive, which was launched in response to Hamas's October 7 attack. Israel has vowed to expand ground operations to Rafah, where some 1.4 million of Gaza's population have sought refuge. It is also a key gateway for the delivery of humanitarian aid. Israel says it is the last major stronghold for thousands of Hamas fighters. The U.S. has said a full-scale invasion of Rafah would be a mistake, urging Israel to instead carry out more precise operations focused on Hamas. Major freight railroads will have to maintain 2-person crews on most routes under a new federal rule that was finalized Tuesday in a milestone in organized labor-long fight to preserve the practice. The Transportation Department's Federal Railroad Administration released the details of the rule that was first proposed during former President Barack Obama's administration. Out of more than 13,000 comments on the rule, about 60 opposed it. There has been intense focus on railroad safety since a fiery February 2023 derailment in Ohio, but significant changes have been made apart from steps the railroad pledged to take themselves and the agreements they made to start providing paid sick time to nearly all workers. Such changes include adding hundreds more trackside detectors and tweaking how to respond to alerts from them. A railroad safety bill proposed in response to the derailment has stalled in Congress. Rail unions have long opposed 1-person crews because of safety and job concerns. Labor agreements requiring 2-person crews have been in place for roughly 30 years at major railroads, although many short-line railroads already operate with 1-person crews without problem. The unions say that conductors are crucial in helping operate the train and keeping engineers alert, and that they serve as first responders. As trains, mainly carrying hazardous material, have grown longer, crews should not be getting smaller, said Eddie Hall, the president of the Brotherhood of Locomotive Engineers and Trainmen Union. He praised the FRA for taking the step President Joe Biden promised. Hall said keeping 2 people in the cab of a locomotive is crucial now that railroads rely on longer trains that routinely stretch for miles. Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg said the U.S. shouldn't accept the current average of nearly 3 derailments a day and that regulators will keep fighting to improve that record. A man has been found dead near his vehicle in Queensland floodwaters as storms bring heavy rain to eastern Australia. 5:20 a.m. on Thursday after being called to the Logan suburb of Greenbank to conduct a welfare check. 2 weather systems are colliding to bring thunderstorms, heavy rain and flash flooding across eastern Australia. Rainfall totals of up to 200 millimeters are expected in Queensland and New South Wales. The trough are passing over each other, causing wild weather in Queensland's south and northern New South Wales. The Bureau of Meteorology said on Thursday morning, stormy skies are headed for northern NSW in an event colloquially known as a black nor'easter, according to BOM senior meteorologist Dean Naramore. When you have these big coastal troughs, the sunshine would disappear, he said. You get these really dark clouds moving along the NSW coast, really strong onshore winds as well, and it will bring widespread heavy and flooding rain. Floods have already hit Queensland south and flood watch alerts are in place for much of Australia's east coast. Greenbank was one of multiple Queensland sites hit with more than 100 millimeters of rainfall in only 1 hour last night, with floods forcing almost 30 road closures across the state. Queensland SES attended to 15 flood incidents overnight, assisting with fallen trees and setting up tops in the Gold Coast, Ipswich and Logan areas. The lower Brisbane River catchment was at the risk of major flooding on Thursday morning after widespread totals of 50 to 100 millimeters overnight. Northern NSW has seen flash flooding and rainfalls over 80 mm in just 3 hours on Thursday morning as the clashing weather systems move south. Lismore could face flooding from Thursday evening as the Wilson River rises. And that's the international news for today. Before we go, another look at the major stories. Zimbabwe authorities declare state of disaster over drought. Gaza, WCK demands independent investigation into aid workers' deaths. India, fire in tailoring shop kills 7 people. Ukraine, Russian drone attack kill 4 people in Kharkiv. United States, major freight railroad to maintain 2-person crews. Australia, man found dead near vehicle after storms. I am Valentina Lawrence. Thank you for watching. You can follow us on all our social media platforms on X, Atlantic TV Net, Facebook and YouTube, Atlantic Television Network, Instagram, Atlantic TV Network. Do remember that peace and unity are the pathways to progress. Thank you. Have a lovely afternoon.